All right, everyone. My apologies for being a couple of minutes late. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Performing Arts Steering Committee to order at 5:02 p.m. And if Tim would read the roll for us.
Absolutely. Lori Wilshire.
Here.
Judy Carlson.
Here.
Lindsay Rinaldi is not here this evening. Marianne Malizi Golia.
Present.
Rich Lannon is not here. Mary Lou Blaisdell. Trish Cleek.
Here.
Tracy Hall.
Here.
Mark Thayer, I do not believe is with us. Jim Donchis, I do not believe is with us. And then Brandon Laws.
Here.
Excellent. 7 members present, we have quorum.
Excellent. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ned and company for the foreseeable future.
Well, great seeing you all again, although it's getting really cold outside. Just to catch you all up, Tim probably made you aware that we had a meeting at 3:30 with the Capital Campaign group. We brought them up to speed to where you all were 2 weeks ago, and then we'll pick up tonight moving forward with you. So what you'll be seeing is the first time that anyone is seeing it. I've got with me this evening my usual crew, Mark Kevitz. Brian is our audiovisual consultant from Ascenta. I'm only going to do first names. So, Joe, you know from last time, is the theater planning and equipment. Kelsey is with Ascentec, also acoustics. Yes, and Jonah you met last time is acoustics, and finally John, my partner from OTJ, will walk us through the next steps in the process. So what we did is we took everything that you'd given us leading up to the meeting 2 weeks ago, everything that we heard from you at the meeting, and we developed what we call a quantitative architectural space program, which we'll show on the screen, as well as some initial, we have lots of jargon, blocking and stacking, diagrams which take the space program and begin to look at how it might be distributed in the existing building structure. Part of that was validation that the kind of areas that you're looking for will in fact fit within the existing building, and we were able to validate that. They are, with maybe a little elbow room, maybe. In terms of the takeaway from today's meeting, we are going to be asking you to give us as clear direction as you think you can on the quantitative program that we're putting forward. I don't believe we have copies of it, so we'll get that out electronically to you so that you can look at it, and that we hear back from you, say, after next week's steering committee meeting, so you've got a chance to kind of really take a close look at it. But we think it pretty closely aligns to what we heard and what we think you'll need. Brian is going to be looking for some feedback on the audiovisual systems, very high level. Jonah actually, I think, has pretty clear direction, but will reiterate what we think we understood from an acoustic point of view, particularly as it relates to chamber music for the symphony. And then the balance of what we're going to be showing you, we're really looking for sort of real-time feedback on it. That will then lead to further development when we see you in 2 weeks. Any questions about bringing us up to speed? No.
Anyone have any questions at all, or unclear on what our goals are for tonight?
Great. So the takeaway is the spreadsheet. The quantitative thing is what you really want to zoom in on. Everything else, kind of take it as it comes at you. It's a lot of information. Stop us when you need to. So with that, John.
Thank you, Ned. And Ned's right, it's going to be a lot of information, but I think you all have been thinking about most of this information that we're going to be talking about tonight. You have been thinking about this for a while, so it's not likely to be really brand new information. We're just trying to put it all together so that we can then move on into the design phase. And so, just the agenda is, as Ned kind of went through it, so kind of we're really already to number 3, which doesn't have graphics for us to be looking at and pretty pictures. It's really kind of Brian asking some questions and getting some feedback on audio-visual systems, which we really didn't touch on 2 weeks ago, but information that really helps us as we're finalizing the program and space requirements and space needs, and all of this kind of works in with our theater planning, the building design, and AV. So Brian, I'll let you.
Fairly informal, I think, but so I guess overall, the audiovisual systems, we're going to be talking about sound systems, so loudspeakers, mixing consoles, and all of those wonderful things. We have video projection systems and video display panels. How are we going to control all of this? Let's make life easy and make it so that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to operate these systems, hopefully. Just general overview of coordination that we'll be doing with the architecture team.
So we might, you as a committee, might want to think about setting up a subcommittee on these kind of technical issues that will keep the process going.
That's right.
And would very likely, really should involve Spectacle, the operator.
If I could ask a question then, Ned, of you and Brian, thinking about who might be appropriate to have on that, what characteristics would you look for in a member of that subcommittee?
Definitely experience operating the sound and video systems. That would be one large one. What else? I guess Spectacle.
Well, I think Lindsay's not here. We can volunteer her. For
So I was wondering whether you want to. So Lindsay and Mark were 2 that I thought might be good given their backgrounds. I just wanted to, if there were other areas of expertise. So they're both in the business.
Right.
Um,
Right. So
I don't know if there was any other practical experience. I don't think any of us here has any experience operating a sound system. So I think
right.
we would rely more on Spectrum for that level of expertise.
Yeah.
But other than that, when you think about lay people sitting around the table, is there anything else that would pop up that?
I think if somebody has a particular personal interest in learning more about the systems, that might be your other member. And then we will rely on your subcommittee to kind of report back to you.
Okay.
Whether it's at our every 2-week meeting or in between. Brian can kind of run off cycle. He doesn't have to run in sync with the regular steering committee meetings. I think things will move more smoothly, and you all won't be sort of barraged with the technical talk.
And that meeting, that subcommittee would be addressing not only audiovisual, but lighting, rigging, stage equipment, all the tech stuff. And our goal from those meetings is twofold. First, to understand, what's required, what's desired, and it's also going to inform budgets. Obviously, we'll want to do this, have this kind of sound system, and that will have a budget ramification. And one thing that we touched on last time, I think, that will be part of this conversation is how much house equipment there is. House being, equipment that's owned by the venue that's available for any user, as opposed to some events that Spectacle would be bringing in that would have to be supplement or enhanced. But I guess last time you were saying you weren't expecting a lot of that. So
a lot
of that type of a big show coming in with.
Yeah, I would expect for most venues and the artists that are touring venues of this size aren't bringing any equipment of their own, other than, you know, the basics, guitars and instruments, but they're, you know, fully expecting sound and lights to be turnkey.
Yeah,
Would it-
I would chime in at this point that, because the committee is also, you know, we're working with you to manage the budget for the project. What Joe and Brian and Jonah are all talking about, and I was speaking to Tim about it earlier, is there are going to end up being probably 4 budgets that we're tracking for the project. One is the architecture, the construction of the project. One will probably be, and you can elaborate on this, Joe, if you need to, the seating
Yep.
for it. Then we'll get the audiovisual systems and the acoustic systems.
Oh, well,
The
then-
sorry,
lighting's
5,
gotta be in
and
there
the
somewhere.
There'll
the
be-
theater equipment itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which would be lighting, rigging, all that stuff.
So those budgets, theater equipment, acoustics, AVIT, seating, and architecture, to some degree can be managed independent of one another. The seating less so, because it's kind of integral to the architectural concept. But the others, I think, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, are slightly independent of the architecture and can be talked about as a committee in those terms. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But all of those discussions go toward kind of what is the facility going to be, what can you know, what events will you be able to host? It affects the long-term operation of the facility, so they're all very important and integral.
So focusing in, and the mention of the subcommittee was particular to the AV and
AV
the
and
acoustics.
theatrical.
And theatrical. So we mentioned 2 people on the committee who have the musical side of the world. Also helpful to have somebody who might have a theater background for the spoken
Yeah.
performing arts as
Absolutely.
opposed to the musical. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, so I will put that as an action item
Great.
Thank
to
you.
get that set.
Other than that, I mean, the sound system will be focusing just sort of very general overview items. The sound system, we'll put a 3-dimensional model together so that we can map the performance of the loudspeakers and make sure that it's going to provide even coverage throughout the room. We're going to be focusing on maximizing the intelligibility, that is to say, when somebody speaks through the PA system, that you can clearly understand what they're saying. Clarity for music. For the video system, the video projection screen, we'll want to make sure that it's large enough so that everybody has decent sight lines to it, to make sure that the images, that any text, like you know, a PowerPoint presentation, for example, that the text is going to be legible. The caveat on that one is always assuming that you don't create your PowerPoint presentation with 6-point font, right?
Or blurry in the first place.
Yeah, right. And also making sure that the system, the video projector and the screen, they all work together, that we understand what the lighting level will be, so that when you're looking at your image in this space, that it looks very, very clear, it's not washed out. You know, I've mentioned some things about the control system to make sure that it's easy to operate operate the system. And also, the system, I imagine, will probably run in 2 different ways. You'll have one way, the basic operation mode, which will be just plugging in a microphone, and you can adjust the volume levels for the sound side, and for video you can select what you plug in a laptop, or you're watching a Blu-ray player or something like that. And it's just very easy. The user interface is easy for anybody to understand. And then the other mode for the system would be when you have a more technical person who wants to get behind the mixing console and, you know, run get into it and get their fingers on the faders and really dig into it. So what else? You know, I mentioned some of the coordination items that we'll be focusing on with the design team. Of course, the audiovisual equipment like loudspeakers and where does the projector go and all of these things. And of course, there's also the coordination with the electrical engineer to make sure that we're providing the conduit and the electrical power and data, all of these things that will make the systems function on day one, and keeping in mind any systems for day two that maybe the project doesn't want to provide, you know, to begin with, but they want to be able to do it in the future without having to, you know, rip down walls and run more cable.
I think that's,
Brian, something you mentioned to me, which I guess would be feedback you'd be looking for from the tech subcommittee, would be about if there are any brand preferences that would kind of direct the level of the design of the system.
Right, right. So when it comes to specifically loudspeakers, there's sort of the, you know, the old way to describe this would be like your Cadillac system, and then there's lesser expensive systems, which will perform great, but sometimes there are requirements. This is part of the feedback we'd be looking for, because depending on like touring acts and rider requirements, you know, the requirements of the performers, sometimes they expect a level of equipment that you know, we'll want to take into consideration.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've talked about before, is, you know, if we want to be able to bring in national touring artists and that we do, to be able to tell them the house system and they go, oh, good, great.
Excellent.
You know, a Meyer, a VDOS, L-Acoustic, like something that I'm gonna get on their rider and we've already got it. You know, I think it's, I understand the different grades that we could be looking at, but to have a system in there that we're just gonna not be able to use, that's for national touring artists, that's just hanging there or sitting there, and we're renting and loading in and hanging and loading out a system every time we have a show, and not using the house system. I just want to kind of bring that up of how easily that could happen if we don't look at what the kind of the grade is. I mean, it's I think a really important thing to the artist's impression and the word that gets out about the venue and so on and so forth, just to look at equipment.
Great. Yep, it's important in attracting the type of touring artists that you're looking for. So I put together a list of, really a bulleted list of considerations that I think will probably be more appropriate for the steering committee. Just some things for them to start thinking about before we do have our next meeting, and I'll
For the sub.
For the subcommittee.
I'm sorry, for the subcommittee. And I'll pass that along to
Perfect.
you guys.
Yeah, I think the structure should be that the subcommittee is really vetting the details and coming and giving recommendations to the steering committee for discussion and action.
Excellent. Tim?
Thank you. So to that end, just logistically, and we can kind of do this offline, I'll be coordinating all this for you administratively. Just setting expectations, can this be conference calls, or do these need to be live person type meetings? Because we have people with full-time jobs.
Sure.
Coordinating schedules and staying on the timeline is really important.
I don't object to a conference
Yeah,
call.
Conference call or go-to meeting or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry.
Perfect, thank you.
and I'll just say, you know, to add to Brian's broad description about AV, it's a lot of similarities with the lighting system in that the system can be as sophisticated as a production and an event needs to be, but at the same time, these days with touchscreen controls and the way all the lighting controls are tied in, it'll be important, you know, sometimes for someone who's coming in and doing, you know, a community event or a lecture or whatever, to come in and be able to turn on the lights without, you know, having to fire a console.
I would agree.
So there, you know, it's all presettable, they can't
Yep.
screw anything up, but it'll, you know, it can be very user-friendly in that sense.
Let me just ask one last question on expectations for that. About how long do you anticipate that subcommittee would need to be actively engaged in setting those parameters for you? And how often do you think they would need to meet?
So we have the schematic design phase that we're moving into next is
Yeah.
8 weeks.
Okay,
If you could fit it within that, because the goal is at the end of the schematic design phase, we're getting cost feedback.
Yes.
from-
okay.
8 weeks.
And about how many meetings do you anticipate, assuming everything goes smoothly, optimal versus 2? Okay.
I mean, I've heard, you know, the first is for recon and the conversation, and I would say the second to present what we heard and what we recommend, and then
Got it.
give your response to that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
might be that those happen in the off week,
Right.
so that gives the design team time to absorb it
Yep.
and be ready for the next.
So I'm going to say 2 to 3 meetings is what we're anticipating needed. Okay, perfect, thank you.
And likely conference calls,
Yeah.
slash
Excellent.
go-tos.
So I'll put to the rest of the subcommittee, I can see maybe some need for us to recruit some potential volunteers for that from outside of the steering committee itself. Might be a good way for us to engage some other people in the community that have an interest, for example, in theater or other areas, that might be a good way for us to do some outreach. But if you yourself have an interest, if you could let Tim know that you have an interest in that subcommittee, that would be great. All right.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move on into talking about what we're calling our initial program, or program version 1. And this was a 2-page document that was put together that I have. We're going to go through kind of in sections, in appropriate sections, so that we can actually see, I think, so we
Perfect.
can read those.
Those of us who are visually challenged as we age
Right.
appreciate you doing that.
Rather than putting the whole spreadsheet up at once, right. And so this is information that we took back from our previous meeting and our understandings of what we've all talked about. And Joe, I'm going to let you kind of take the lead
Sure,
on
yeah.
running through this, since you initiated this document.
Yeah, this
And-
is, I wrote this, the original version is dated January 18th, which is a couple of days after our last meeting. And what it is, it incorporates the answers to the questionnaire that we circulated,
Mhm.
stuff that we talked about during the meeting. And then in a couple of cases here and there, some other spaces that weren't specifically discussed that we would recommend as a team, we would recommend. And so this is a list of each individual space in the venue with nominal dimensions, square footages. These are net square footages. Some of you may not be familiar with net versus gross square footages, but these room sizes that we're talking about are you know, what's sometimes called paint to paint.
I was gonna say,
the
yep.
inner portion of the building. And then on top of that, there'll be square footages for circulation and
Mhm.
mechanical wall thicknesses and things like that. And theaters are the least efficient type of building, so the grossing factor is higher than it would be in an office building. So, you know, what we'd like to do tonight is just to go through this, you know, line by line, if only to mention it, but feel free to ask any questions, any further explanation that you might need. You know, it is divided into various categories. The first is the core of the project, what we call the audience chamber, where the seats are. Then there's the stage and a crossover corridor. The audience chamber, you'll see in the diagrams that we've been working on, has assumed, as we talked about last time, a total of 750 people, 500 at a lower orchestra level, and 250 in the balcony. The stage per this program is the stage house itself would be 60 feet wide and 35 feet deep. That is not particularly wide. We'd like to, we're gonna work on eking out more wing space, as much wing space as we can. 35 feet is also a minimum, and that is the working useful depth of the stage. So that's why there's that third item, the crossover corridor, a 6-foot wide corridor behind the stage, so that performers can go from one side of the stage to the other. It wants to be wide because it's often used for prop tables and road boxes and things like that. Sometimes that corridor is 10 feet wide in larger venues. This stage footprint, what I said here was 40 feet wide, 40-foot wide proscenium, 25 feet high. When I started to do some diagrams, the 40 seemed a little too wide for the 60-foot footprint, so we're talking about a 35-foot proscenium at the moment. But all this is to be, discussed and worked on further. We're definitely talking about fly space, a gridiron, a walkable surface for accessing rigging that would be at 50 feet over the entire footprint of the stage, plus an additional 7 feet of head height to the bottom of steel, and then there'd be the steel supporting the rigging and the roof and smoke hatches and things like that.
And Joe, when you're talking 50 feet, you're talking from the stage
From the-
up, not
50
from the
feet
floor
clear, right.
up.
That's
Got
right.
it.
That's correct. And so all these dimensions are good. They're not overly generous, in part just being mindful of the budget and also being mindful of the space we have to deal with. But I think this should serve various events very well. So that's, the core, if you will, the audience chamber and the stage. And then the next category are spaces that are associated with the theater function, as opposed to support spaces, dressing rooms and such, which we'll get to in a moment. One thing we talked a lot about last week was the ability to accommodate music, not full orchestra, but chamber music, smaller ensembles. And there was we were seen to be leaning toward an arrangement where the stage platform was pushed out into the house, which would be a better acoustical environment and probably better for smaller audiences, and chime in as you will. So we know that we need space to accommodate that. We talked, if the ensemble were on stage, we would need an orchestra shell. If the ensemble was out into the house, we need a thrust stage. So with either one, we need storage space for that. So we're allowing the 250 square feet to store either a shell or a demountable thrust platform, or maybe a combination of both. We would, of course, have a control booth, which would be for lighting and sound, for recorded sound, not for sound mixing. It also would be large enough for a stage manager, depending on the event. One thing that's not indicated here as a special allowance is that these days control booths have to be wheelchair accessible. So that's something that we're going to be dealing with. Then the next is the sound mix position. That's for, we touched on that last time. That's a location or locations that are in among the seats for live mixing of the amplified sound. We would have a fall spot booth, which would be up high. You want a fall spot angle wants to be high and steep, so that you're lighting the performer and not the scenery behind the performer.
Yep.
So that's going to be part of our working on the ceiling of the space, working with lighting catwalks as well. There'll be a dimmer room, an AV rack room, TBD. Those are technical spaces that, in one sense can be located anywhere in the building. In another, we try to locate them in a way that minimizes conduit lengths and things like that. I've listed a couple of items here that we asked specifically about, and in terms of the questionnaire response, we're not talking about an orchestra pit, nor are we talking about a trap room. Although, when you look at the diagrams, we seem to have a luxury of additional space, but that probably won't last very long. But when we were on a conference call a couple of days ago, it looked like there might be a possibility to introduce an orchestra pit in a small trap area, which you're not so concerned about, but a theater group, might want to.
While we're on that topic, it's worth thinking a little bit, maybe a lot, about what might you do with the pit orchestra if you were going to do some musical theater. I can well imagine that somebody someday might want to do some musical theater. If there's no pit, then you got to get creative and put it somewhere else. So that's worth a little bit of thought.
One question before you go further on this, Joe. So you mentioned, my ears pricked up when you mentioned making the booths wheelchair accessible.
Yes.
I'm assuming, we haven't talked about it, that in that 750 seat total, we've also accommodated wheelchair accessibility
absolutely.
spaces.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah.
I don't remember talking about that specifically,
No,
but
we
just
didn't,
wanted
but
to make sure that.
it's a good question.
Yep.
And don't hesitate to ask questions like that. That sort of thing, frankly, is kind of second nature for all of us, but not necessarily to you. The balcony will be wheelchair accessible. We'll get people to the back of the balcony, and then we'll get people to at least 2 locations
On the main.
on the main level.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else have any questions on this section of information?
Nope, seeing none, we'll move to the front of house.
Okay, so front of house and public spaces. Box office, we talked about 3 ticket windows, 2 for sales, 1 for will call. A small manager's office associated with the box office. A lobby that is really up for grabs when we get into design. This square footage is 5 square feet per seat, which is pretty small. It's a pretty minimum amount just for people to stand around and not feel crowded.
It's in Broadway,
Well, Broadway sometimes is 3
Depends on
square
which
feet.
one.
But I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds of lobby discussion until we start to look at real drawings, because there's definitely a desire for the lobby to serve other types of events and things like that. And the 5 square feet would not be big enough for 750 people. But that lobby space meant for 750, might be good for 300 or something like that. So.
And also you think about, you have lobby space on the main level, but you also have lobby space outside the balcony level, and, things like that. So it's not all just a single level.
And it's important to realize that that's the space you have when you're standing there with the drink in your hand. It's not the space you need to get from your seat into the lobby. And something that doesn't show up here, but is going to be part of our work, is sound and light blocks, doorways, double doors into the theater, things like that. And they'll also, I think we started a discussion when we were talking together recently about how you actually enter the theater and how you deal with those 2 levels. So that's all very much TBD. In response to the questionnaire, there was an interest potentially to some kind of VIP lobby area, and we'll just see how that evolves with the design. We talked about coat check, nothing dedicated, but sort of a temporary pipe and drape as required. Concessions, we have a rule of thumb that you have 4 feet of bar per 100 people served in a 15 intermission. So that's where that 250 square feet comes from. That's also going to be a larger, more detailed discussion, including storage. We're mindful that we'll need storage, but that's TBD, depending on exactly what you'll be serving. Bathrooms, very important. We've got the square footage is based on 1 fixture for every 25 seats, twice as many for women as men. Catering support. I was careful to indicate that as an allowance, since that's not our thing. But it would be, we established last time that it's just for food prep, warming kitchen, something like that, not for full cooking. Catering tables and chair storage, we say none on the assumption that it's rented and brought in as you need it. Front of house storage for programs, mats, things like that. Was allowed for that, as well as a house manager's office, pretty small, but that would be associated with the lobby. and then, someplace, not much space for ushers to come in and do their stuff for the show.
Questions on this or observations?
All right, thank you.
And obviously, if anything seems missing, chime in too.
Yeah. So back up stage.
Yes, backstage in sports spaces, stage door, lobby, and security office, where do the performers enter, where do people visit, wanting to go backstage, that's all part of, the layout of the facility. Loading dock, of course, we're figuring on 2 bays, one for the show truck plus delivery. We would think 2 bays is the recommended minimum. And then we get into dressing rooms. We've got 2 star dressing rooms, each with their own toilet and shower, and quite a nice room. I mean, not just a place for a makeup table, but a little outside reception area, maybe with a little piano or something for the star to relax or receive guests. Next, we have communal dressing rooms. That's one thing where the questionnaire, you guys said you only needed 1. I gave you 2, because when a show comes, if another type of show comes in, they don't, and each of them has their own dedicated toilet and shower. They're not male, female specific, and they can take as many as 10 people, fewer, more people squeeze in, but just for larger casts. Then backstage restrooms, a couple unisex restrooms, so if someone backstage, a crew member, a visitor, can use a bathroom without having to go into the dressing rooms. Green room, just big, really should be as large as possible. How big is this room, you architects?
I did that last week. It's about 512 square feet.
Yeah, I should have.
Not 11,
Yeah.
not 13.
512.
But this is it's always good
About.
for kids to have that reference. So you can see the green room at 700, it's a big room.
Yeah.
But it wants to be a big room, and it'll be used for receptions and other things as well. It would have kitchenette, its own little kitchenette, microwave, sink, etc., refrigerator. And then this is something that I always put in as a multi-purpose room. I mean, there are different events are going to come in with different needs. Some people are going to have a lot of wardrobe, or extra cast, or whatever. And rather than having a series of dedicated assigned rooms, this is just a big room that can be used as required. If possible, it would be adjacent to the green room. Sometimes we do that so that you can make it into one big room. You get the idea. Technical supervisor's office, we haven't really had a discussion specifically about staffing, but you are absolutely going to need a person who's here full-time to run the place and tend to all your technical needs. Whatever event is using the venue, they're going to have their own staff, stage management, and et cetera. So they need an office as well, backstage. Crew lockers with a little kitchenette. That's, that kind of goes back to what how you imagine the permanent staff is, but that's something that would be, certainly desirable. And then I just threw 1,000 square feet at general storage. I think you remember last time I said there's never going to be enough storage. And actually, as with the diagrams that you're going to see in a minute, we have in better shape than you often are. So that's covered. Likewise, but that's different from piano storage. For storing a grand piano or a small grand, which wants to be at stage level, and it wants to be climate controlled as well.
Questions on this area? I do have one, especially having just seen the basement. How much of this is level dependent? i.e., is this all, can some of this go in the basement?
Yeah.
Can some of this go?
The rule
That's
of
the
thumb,
conversation.
what we say is, it's ideally, every single support space should be directly adjacent to the stage and the stage level, and that never happens. So then you really just have to prioritize.
Okay,
Something like, piano storage, you don't wanna have to put a piano in an elevator to
Right.
get up a stage level. And then it's kind of up for grabs. I mean, there's an argument to have the green room at stage level.
mm-hmm,
And then what else can you fit? There's an argument to have the stars at stage level. And it really, if we were talking about obviously the loading dock has to be at stage level.
right,
If we're talking about it, we're not talking about it here, but when there's a scene shop, that's gonna be at stage level. So it's a good question, and it's all, TBD.
Okay.
And I think a discussion with you all is to see what those priorities are.
And-
Tracy, I was gonna say, I just am interested in what Peter's thoughts are about all of this.
Yeah, a couple of things that, first of all, it's great to have the number of spaces and so forth, that's really, really nice. From a technical supervisor's office / staff, our plan is to probably have 3 full-time, one that would be box office manager, so it's at the minimum, a GM or kind of the person handling the overall building, talking to rental clients and coordinating, someone who's in charge of the tech and event day, and then a box office, so if there's a little more square footage.
Well, that's
there's a
covered-
box office on
That's,
the
that's,
previous.
so
Yeah,
everything
you
you
just-
described is divided, so this is just for the tech person who's dealing with the gear.
Okay,
There's
got
the
it.
box
That's-
office, manager's office, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna get to admin.
Okay,
For
got
your
it,
GM.
perfect.
Yeah.
The only other thing on the loading dock, and that may be considered elsewhere, which is to mention, the potential to put shore power there.
Oh, yeah.
or-
Yeah, we usually do like a 400 amp.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We didn't, and I started to put something in about, buses and stuff like that, and that's a not really, that's more site related and street
Yes.
related, and,
Right.
but that is something that, should be just considered, things like that, parking, will there be valet parking? All those things outside the building, that don't really, aren't really part of this list here, so.
Yeah, right, tonight, we're really focusing on spaces inside the building tonight, so.
Anything else on the backstage and support spaces? Okay.
Well, and one thing,
Yep.
about, we're showing 2-star dressing rooms, 2 communal dressing rooms, and as with your question about, are they level sensitive? Well, you'll see, we're trying to keep star dressing rooms at stage level, but if we want something else that has higher priority, well, then can you
Communal
get
could go down.
1-star dressing room at stage level, 1-star dressing room at the second level, or something like that, so
Okay,
we'll work through those.
And, I touched on ADA accessibility, and of course, all these spaces have to be accessible.
Mhm.
And every dressing room is accessible. There was a period where the thought was, well, you make some of the dressing rooms accessible, and those days are over. And in this case, there aren't that many to begin with, so.
That's right.
And there we go, there's venue administration. Last time we talked about 3 offices, so I just sort of randomly assigned some square footage to that. Very straightforward. I specifically asked if there was wanted to be a conference room, and the answer was no. But I guess I'll just say that we have found that, when you're meeting with
Yeah,
potential
it would be great, I was
users-
kind of saying that as a priority, that
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
further down, but
Yeah.
certainly if the space is there, that would,
Yeah, doesn't have to be
That'd be
huge, but
yeah, no, that'd be definitely useful if it's possible in the space game.
So then there are the 5 categories with a total of basically 22,000 net square feet, which grosses up at 60% to 35,000 square feet.
It's not bad. Student centers are much worse.
Any questions on this part?
Okay.
And this will be made
Wait.
available to you
Yeah, we'll get
electronically.
copies.
Follow.
How many square feet do we have to work with?
Well, so the 2 buildings together are about 53,000 gross square feet. But you have to think about you can't directly translate it to this because the square footage for the audience chamber is roughly 4,800 square feet for the main part. And that would take out, that would hollow out one of the floors in the shoe store, which would take out 4,800 from that 53. So that starts to come down, and you'll see as when we get to the blocking diagram, kind of how much additional space remains after we try to distribute these spaces. So,
The stage itself.
and the
takes out
stage itself
full-
also hollows out
full
4 floors of the apartment building. So
Yeah.
to think about, well, we have 58,000 square feet, and this is only 35,000. That means we have 18,000 square feet we could do something else with. Well, it's not a direct translation.
Not really,
so,
yeah.
right.
And does that include the basement?
Yeah, the 58 does include the basement,
Yeah.
that's right.
53.
Or 53.
Oh, we could have used that extra 5,000.
We could have.
I was wondering where we got it, but I was
Yeah.
happy we
I'm
had
holding
it.
it to it.
Are you set? Did you get your answer?
That was, yeah, thank you
Does
very
that
much.
work? Okay.
Thanks.
All right, so what we're going to see now are a couple of very preliminary concept sketches of the stage and audience chamber in plan and section, and then we'll take a look at what we've been talking about as the blocking diagrams for dispersal of the program. So,
Yeah, so these are a couple of sketches that I did just to kind of give people a handle on what, what kind of space we're talking about, footprint and things like that. So there's the 60-foot wide stage house with the 35-foot depth and the crossover behind. The idea for the orchestra level would be that about 450 seats would be on telescopic risers. There are 15 rows in this diagram, and it'll be more clear in a minute when you see the section, with about 30 people per row, with 2 aisles serving the rows. And then there's what we call a parterre section around the telescopic riser section, which would be where you'd have additional seating. So those numbers in the circle are nominal seat counts. And then you have the balcony above. And maybe now go to the section, it's really more understandable. This is not a design, but it is just, it's a diagram to sort of show you the mechanics that we're thinking about. So you can see here, this is the telescopic seating section. And one of the purposes of the parterre, the wraparound, is when we go to flat floor, these are retracted and this whole unit stores underneath. This is higher than we'd like it to be, just kind of aesthetically. When I sketched that, I was figuring on a 10-inch rise with the telescopic risers. We can bring that down to 9, which would bring everything down. We might have a couple rows on the flat. I mean, we're going to tinker with it and do what we can to lower that. But you get the idea. So there you can see 2 rows in the parterre section that wraps all the way around that you'll remember from the plan with additional seating. And then there's a balcony which would have the balance of the seating with 250. It's going to be relatively steep like that because you want to get obviously
The sight line.
sight lines to the stage for everyone, especially for dance. You want to be able to see dancers' feet. I touched on a recital chamber music concert, and if we built, or when we built a stage extension, it would be great for the people sitting in this portion here, but you would not have the sight lines from the balcony
Yeah.
to see that stage. If it did, it would be further back and steeper. But talking to Jonah, and maybe you can
Sure.
describe what we were talking about a couple days ago.
Yeah, and well, here's when it would be great to have Mark and Bob in the room, but my thought was for a chamber music concert, probably that would be a smaller audience event, and it would have a really wonderfully intimate quality if people were seated only in the telescopic seating and on the parterre, kind of wrapping around an extended stage in the front.
Yep.
And if that ended up being, very comfortable for, up to 400 seats, let's say, something like that, That might be just a just fine kind of number for that kind of event. And then acoustically, to have a, you know, an unamplified classical music program, small number of performers playing forward of the proscenium, that's wonderful. You know, that you're close to everybody listening. It's a very intimate, connected experience. The alternative to that would be to have the performers be on stage behind the proscenium. Would definitely need some reflector panels above them, and preferably at the sides as well. That together system is called an orchestra shell. That works fine too, and then you could get the full 750 seating capacity. But just you know, thinking about it, thought, you know, maybe that extended stage for that kind of event maybe makes sense. So that's for feedback.
And I think this section makes it easy to talk about that stage extension and the fact that the telescopic seating can be deployed at different intervals. So it doesn't have to be fully deployed all the way out to its full extension every single time. And it can be pre-programmed to, you know, come out 10 rows or 15 rows or something in between. It deploys from the bottom first, right? So
So you don't have steep cliffs?
Yeah, right.
Oops.
Llamas.
But Joe's point about when it is all retracted, it's stored back here, and
Yep.
that's going to be a volume, you know, a wall in the back of the stage, and in the back of the house that we have to walk around. And then these are the catwalks,
Live catwalks, and then the follow spot booth, you know, with, just to keep, you know, if we had more height or wanted more height, we'd put the follow spot booth back here, but this is fine. It would be sort of in the middle of the catwalk, and you'd have the angle that you're looking for. A couple of things that I didn't include, you know, this parterre gallery would wrap all the way around. And we could also do the same with the balcony level too, which might be nice for the room. The control booth would be here. Didn't do that. And and just here, the stage, the 50-foot gridiron, that's this line here. And you know, the rigging is above and accessible from the grid. And that'll be a part of the tech discussion, what the rigging will be like.
As Joe said, this is not a design. There are a number of things that are not shown there that are yet to be coordinated, you know, reflectors and how we're enclosing the follow spots and all of that, but that's for later.
But hopefully, you know, this is the basic concept that we're working on.
Although it would be fair to say that the conversation about building out the stage and reduced audience size for a chamber performance, that automatically sort of works from an acoustic point of view, whereas if it's on the stage, there's an investment in the shell.
Yes, I think there would be some level of investment either way. But if a decision is to be made, you know, if a decision is made relatively soon to go in one direction or the other direction, then that simplifies shortens the equipment list and simplifies the storage coordination.
Is that an either-or question for us?
Well, it could be both, but then you need more storage and you can buy more stuff.
Okay.
Hey, Peter,
Mary
what's your experience with that? I mean, should we, even if we go with the thrust, should we still consider a shell?
Is the shell, would the shell or the reflectors be permanently into the grid, or
They'd be tip and fly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so.
And
that would limit
Joan, I
us
mean,
from-
it would probably be talking about how far, how deep, well, 35 feet isn't that much to begin with, so,
It's not that
yeah. So there'd be at least 2 or
Maybe
possibly 3,
Right.
which would be permanently, you know, which take up space in the flies. You know,
Right.
you lose a set, you know, where they,
You lose a lot.
a couple of sets where they occur.
And then the vertical sides are stored, they sort of stack and store like a
Yeah.
partition.
Right.
And you know, it is, if we're talking about a shell with those side and rear walls, you know, basically these towers, these movable towers, which nest for storage, are as tall as the proscenium is high. So we're talking 20, 25 feet. So the shell storage area, to your question earlier about what has to be at stage level,
Yep.
that absolutely
That has to be
does.
at stage level.
And that has to be directly adjacent to the stage. So that's I'm realizing as we're talking that my listing the 250 square feet as an either or isn't quite true. It is in terms of footprint, but if it's shelf storage, it's 25 feet tall. And if it's thrust stage storage, it's 10 feet tall. So,
Yeah, I think
That's a
Mike,
good point.
with the thrust stage concept, in my experience has been with these type of with this chamber music or that type of thing, usually is a more intimate audience, and it usually is, and this would be more for the acousticians than me to say whether this definitively, but usually the sound experience is better if they're not upstage in the proscenium. So if they're in the room, I would love it if regularly chamber music drew 750, that would be great. Generally, my experience is that a more intimate audience is usually what is the case, and in some cases lends itself better to experience with that type of a show, both acoustically and from an audience perspective. So, I think looking at the cost benefit of is the shell making that and doing it upstage and creating the 750 seating and sightlines in the balcony, what's the trade-off for doing the extension and doing it in that more living space? And the other thing from an amplified standpoint, and this may be getting ahead, has there with the pull-out riser system, has there been consideration for front of house mix position? Would it be on that?
it could be.
Okay, and like I said, I'm sure these things are still being.
Yeah, I guess I assume it'd be like just in front of the parterre, toward the back, but not under the balcony.
Not on the back. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that from feedback that we get is, they can be center of the room even if it's in the back of the room, but don't put me under a balcony. And they go,
Right. Yeah.
I get it, and understandably so. I mean, the engineers are just trying to do the best that they can, and having a balcony overhang is really gonna not give them a real auditory experience.
I mean, what would do is pull it out, pull those however many seats, 6, 8, 10, however many seats per row.
Right.
2 rows worth at least, 3 if you needed it. Those seats would get pulled out and you would drop in plug platforms to level it off.
Okay,
And,
In terms of a decision timeline, it's not today. And I think you probably have maybe a month
Okay,
where we could be, weighing the
pros and cons
benefits
of those.
of one or the other, but not all the way to the end of the schematic phase.
Okay,
Yeah, that would be too far.
One quick question.
yes, Tim.
Roughly, and we don't need this answer tonight, but the question I have is, rough guess is how many times we would actually, in a year, actually see an event like?
Where we would use that.
Where we would use that. Just a ballpark understanding. I think that piece of data would actually help inform.
Yeah, if we used it once or twice a year versus, once or twice a month would be a big difference in how often,
Yeah.
how important it would be to design it that way.
Well,
My best guess, just take it away, would be a handful of times a year.
Okay,
That's just good data for you.
Yeah, and that's,
Yeah.
Based on one man's opinion.
But how many years' experience, right? I mean, on how many venues?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
if it's something I think the group should think about. If it's,
Oh, yes.
5 to 10 times a year, I mean, that might be a lot.
And some of the consideration with how much space those, because you're right, those tall shell, that's a lot of wing space being eaten
yeah,
alive.
it eats up a lot of space, and the shell would be around 250, 300,000 for this, say around 250.
250,000?
The Winger Diva,
That's
still
our-
talking
Whoa,
about this.
okay.
Just forget about the show,
Whoa,
all right?
yeah,
I think that decision's made.
Yeah, we don't need to show.
Well, but, you know, but there would be some kind of back wall, which would be a cost, and it's the cost of the platform. It would not, the alternative isn't for free, you know, it's maybe all in, it's maybe half or a third, plus the building cost, you know, structurally, to make a 25-foot tall, clear height thing is gonna have a big impact on structure too, as well as the space.
Mary Ann?
Yeah, I guess I just want to be clear, this whole conversation has been centered around a chamber orchestra music sort of event. Are there other things that we would see using either the thrust stage or the shell for? And by having or not having one, are we then limiting what we can have here? Or are we only talking about these smaller chamber sorts of things?
No,
Because that first could be used for a
The
lot.
thrust,
Yeah.
yeah.
Press could be used for
Okay.
drama or
Widely.
speaking or all kinds of.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
the
think
thrust
there's
gives
anything
some,
else.
I think, additional flexibility that the shell
Does
does.
not.
Does not, okay.
And for a third of the cost.
Okay.
The
Alright.
other thing is that there are some performance, for instance, a good example is that every holiday season we do a number of performances throughout New England with the Vienna Voice Choir.
Mhm.
They hate microphones. They don't want anything mic'd unless they're in a venue that's 1,500 or larger. And even then, they'll, if there's any way they can not be mic'd, they prefer not to. And we put them in all types of venues. Sometimes they're in a proscenium with no shell, and they're upstage of that shell. We try to pull them out as far as we can. Artists are and tour man, they're used to going into someplace different every night and
Mhm.
figuring it out. And there would be rare occasion where they'd say, absolutely, we can't play there because of, you know, so many venues that they do play were built 80 years ago, and they're dealing with that. So, it's probably not a situation where you'd have to think about it as, well, we're just simply gonna lose that. You know, usually there's a way to make it work. There is a quality, you know, would it be better to do X versus Y? Well, sure, you could make those arguments for, certainly, but usually there's ways, to figure it out that would not prevent.
Right. Thank you.
That's a great example. How many tickets do they sell?
Well, they
Voice
do
Choir.
sell, you know, at the holiday, they sell out our venue in Lexington, which is 800. We bring them to Cape Cod, which is 1,400, and they probably sell 12 there.
So that's a case where a
Yeah.
show would be a benefit.
But in this case, if we were to put them, if there was no stage apron extension, and we were to put them on stage, upstage at the proscenium, we could still we've done that. And it's not as good, I mean, but even just a little bit of a touch of reinforcement in the sound system is sometimes called for, but, or a shell there are other shells that just are not permanent installs that can be
Right.
brought in. So, like I say, there's ways to do it, but that is an example of one, acoustic performance that would be in that capacity range versus more of a 4 or 5 instrument chamber ensemble, which
So being a little conscious of the time, unless there's something else to add to the discussion of shell versus thrust right now, we know we've got a little bit of time to think about that. We know there's a question of both cost and flexibility, so at least we have the parameters that we need to keep in mind. If there were other particular performances you can think of, Peter, that we would want to keep in mind when we make that decision, that'd be helpful, or your experiences on what you've seen would also be helpful.
Okay.
And I'll let you
Great, thank you.
move us along.
So just as Joe said, this is not a design. The blocking diagrams that we're gonna show you, those are not a design either. And we're gonna show you them level by level. And it's an illustration, it's kind of a test fit of how the program that we just saw in the spreadsheet doesn't lay out, but how it occupies the building, how much space we might have left. And this, of course, is what we have there, the shoe store on the right, the apartment building on the left. And starting at the basement level, so this large area of 4,800 square feet is below the audience chamber.
Yep.
And we'll start backstage. We've got We're showing a 700 square foot green room. All these areas that you see, all these blocks are based on the square footages in the spreadsheet that we talked about. So for the time being, we're saying the green room, the crew locker room, production office, and some backstage restrooms could be in that basement level. General storage under the stage. Joe had 1,000 square feet. This is 1,125 square feet. So you can see this color is what kind of remains. Now, you also have to understand that these numbers, again, are the net square footages. So you take that and gross it out. You know, we need to carve out corridors and walls and some mechanical space, but we've also tried to accommodate and anticipate the larger mechanical spaces down at the basement level. We're also anticipating stairs, 2 in the front of house and 2 in the back of house. Obviously, we've got to get from the basement to the 4th floor in the apartment building, and we've got to get people from the basement up to the balcony level in the front of house. And you might say, well, can we save money by only building 2 or 3 stairs and connecting them? We have to be careful about the connections between front of house and back of house for security reasons. You know, not just to the dressing rooms, but also to the green room. You know, if you have patrons who are going to have a meet and greet with people who are coming to perform, you know, where is that going to happen, and how do you control access and things like that? So at this stage, we like to start off with, you know, the 4 stairs and 2 elevators. Again, this is our starting point, so we need to have each level in each part of the building fully accessible.
I'm going to ask a question of Tim, I think. I don't know if you would know the answer, but having had the experience of wanting to do an event in the Alex building and being told 2 weeks before that we couldn't do it there when we had 300 people coming, when does things like the fire marshal telling us how much egress we need to have fall into things like this?
Well,
Yeah, they will do that.
we're cognizant of that
Okay.
from day one.
Okay.
So we know that we need 2 means of egress from every, you know, part of the building. And
Excellent.
so that's why, you know, they're going to be connected by corridors in the end and things like that. So
You're good.
we work with that in every project we do. So again, kind of the stairs and mechanical. We're showing initially here some front of house storage, a house manager, usher, and some men's and women's restrooms down here at the basement level. It's just a thought, and there will be, you'll see more distributed up the different levels. This purple area, well, the purple areas are front of house, the green, or whatever this color is, as it's projected, is back of house, and you'll see the stage and audience chamber colors as we get higher up. But you can see that this basement event room, 2,000 square feet here, is just something we have a question mark. It wasn't on the program. So this is kind of some of that space that is available. All of this area under the audience chamber is not programmed from that spreadsheet. You know, so we've got 4,800 square feet there, 2,000 square feet there. And again, some of that will be eaten away by our grossing factor.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to be careful about what we program under the audience chamber. We want to keep our mechanical equipment and systems out from underneath there, because all we would be doing is causing acoustical problems. We want to be careful about what's programmed underneath the stage. But you can see we have a lot of space to work with at the basement level, because it made sense, as you'll see, to start programming the other floors with all the other uses.
Mm-hmm.
Joe mentioned the possibility of considering a trap room under the stage. Well, you can see we have space to be able to talk about that and see if that's a need that you want to, or something that you want to provide.
And an orchestra pit.
And an orchestra pit that could be out in here without any real impact on program.
Tim?
Height, do you have an approximate idea from, at this level, what your ceiling height would be?
Well, we know the existing bottom of structure is about 8'4", something like that, 8 feet. So And we're gonna have to, that structure in there is not what we're gonna have for the audience chamber, because that is not an assembly rated floor system, so it could be a little bit deeper in the end. But this is low ceiling area for sure.
Okay.
I think the area, the basement area in the apartment building is a little bit higher, but not much.
It's about a foot higher.
It's about a foot higher, so.
So the quality of space is,
Right, that's
Right.
exactly.
Iffy.
It is. So, you know, if you want a space down there to rent out for somebody that doesn't need an extravagant space, then we might have that potential. Again, we have two means of egress. We're thinking about toilet facilities down there for them and things like that, so.
Any questions on this
the basement level? Okay. So then we move up to the main level, and again, this is not a design. I'll keep saying that. It's hard for us to actually start laying these out without designing it, but so let's start. Here's the stage. This is the 60 by 35 foot stage area. So that's 2,100 square feet. The area between these red marks, that's the 35-foot wide proscenium that was in Joe's diagram. The crossover, this 6-foot wide crossover is back here. We have loading coming in at stage level, the 400 square feet that was in the program. Piano storage directly off of the stage. And again, where you see the elevator and stairs are going to be consistent from floor to floor, so we're not moving those around. Backstage, we were, stage door security right off of loading. This is where we started asking ourselves, who has priority for stage level, because it's not infinite. So we're showing the 2-star dressing rooms back there and orchestra shelf storage. To get the 250 square feet, we're at least showing that it needs to be at this level. Obviously, it's not going to poke out
The side of the wall.
right? But certainly, the orchestra shell storage, piano storage, loading, and security really has to be at that level, right? Now, there's a question. Can the crossover just be a regular corridor behind stage? That makes it more efficient, so that we don't have to have yet another corridor. There are plenty of theaters that do that. So even though this is yellow, it still can be circulation there. If we look at the audience chamber, this is 60 by 80 feet. Now you start to also understand that given the stage width that we're looking at and the audience chamber width, we're starting to go, as we lay this out and think about all the relationships and the sizes and proportions that the spaces need to be, we've kind of gotten away from that diagram that we saw with the Panasonic Theater, which was only 50 feet wide and had some available space along Pearl Street that might be used for retail. So as we've learned about the programming that you want to do and are kind of working towards that optimal proportions and volumes, we're looking at a wider stage, a wider house than what that Panasonic diagram was. So, something we do want to make sure we understand is that not having retail space along there, is okay. Again, the program blocks that you see here are what we went through in the spreadsheet, which are really theater focus, the Performing Arts Center focused spaces. They don't, on that list, we didn't have the retail, we didn't have the tapas lounge. But after we kind of start designing and moving some of these around, maybe we find some space down here for that, because you'll see we do have some extra space elsewhere. I just wanted to make you all aware how we've progressed from that initial concept.
so John and Joe, I guess all of you, some of the images that we look at have daylight in the audience chamber. Is that something that we should be avoiding, that it's possible, that, because I think of the frontage on Pearl and how wonderful that would be to be able to see into the audience chamber, not during a performance, but, you know, if there's an event.
If there's a
going on
community
or-
event or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's great as long as you can do a blackout.
as long as you can control
Honest to
it.
God,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
total
good.
blackout,
Yeah.
total blackout.
So it's blackout, it's also acoustical
And there's
consideration as well,
The
right?
windows, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right, the need for blackout is driven by Joe, but then it has to be done in a way that doesn't necessarily add absorption to the room, unless we need it there for other reasons.
But those windows have to be acoustically isolated, right, from the street, right?
Right, yes, that's
Yeah.
right, yes, good point.
Right. I don't know how many times you have maybe emergency vehicles going down Pearl
A
Street. or
lot.
something.
Right, a lot.
Right, so that's a consideration, you know, if you start to poke holes in your exterior wall, well, we
You're
have
letting it
to
sound.
deal with that,
Yep.
right?
It
But
can be, again,
daylight
it can
is-
be dealt with.
Mhm.
There are costs associated with it.
Right.
And we're not asking you to make a decision on it. We would like to know your opinion though. If it's something you want us to explore, you don't care, it's,
I will also add in per our zoning, just so the group knows, it's pretty well understood that they've got, particularly on the first floor, windows are encouraged. And so, we'll have, and this is a conversation to have at a later date, once we get more through the design, but we'll have two avenues for permitting this project, and if it's designed a certain way, we wouldn't necessarily have to go through a site plan process, we could go straight to a building permit type process. And windows and how the windows are designed is a big discussion point on that. So if you were to have windows, that pushes you more to just a building permit process.
And is it possible to do that along Main Street and the lobby area and meet those requirements?
So Main Street, so the answer is each street is its own frontage.
Okay,
So that's how you calculate that, and so.
well, maybe we
Main
do
Street
bump
would
out into the
probably-
wall there. We put a window. Problem solved.
Yeah.
So that's,
No sidewalk there.
yeah, I mean, the question I have is what's the cost on the blackout? Because that wasn't in our original pro forma, so I need to know that.
so we,
And the sound isolated windows, yeah.
yeah, it's actually the windows that are probably the more
So that's-
expensive.
So something to explore maybe until we hit the point where we say it blows the budget enough that we'd go the other route.
as we begin to develop the design and schematic, and we start to understand more of the massing and things like that, where we start sketching the exterior as well, then we'll be discussing that again.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I guess just
Yes, Mary
a
Ann?
comment that Lori and I both heard today was that the exterior of their building isn't very exciting along Pearl Street.
Correct, it's not.
So,
It's a big blank wall.
so, you know, if there aren't windows there or something to kind of open it up to the street and make people more aware of it, then I think we need to think about what else we do with art or whatever.
Right.
To
Big
make
windows,
that,
whatever.
with lighting,
Mhm.
exterior lighting, to
Mhm.
make that more exciting.
Jim, do the windows have to be real windows? Or
No.
could they be faux windows where you
Yeah.
can put in art or you can put in coming
And
attractions?
Like
Lighting
storefront
or-
window,
and
storefront, whatever you call them.
But there's
Yep.
still a wall there, it's like
Yep.
a faux window?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that.
And that would meet that criteria? So it doesn't have to be a window that looks, it just has to be glass or some sort of.
So that may be
Oh, that's
an
an
alternative
excellent
as well, yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, we can figure that out.
Anything else on the main level?
Well, we have, let me
Yep,
show
keep
you
going that,
Yeah.
yep.
the front of the house. So the lobby, here at 750 square feet is a portion of the lobby program that was in the spreadsheet. Concessions, catering support at this level. Again, this isn't necessarily where it's gonna be located, we're just trying to accommodate it somewhere on this level. Women's room at 500 square feet, men at 250. This is half of the area that was in the spreadsheet, so this is the level where most of the patrons are gonna be, so these are our largest restrooms down here. Again, trying to anticipate mechanical, electrical spaces here, kind of off the alley where things are coming in, services are coming in. Box office and manager, again, all this we kind of see as key program for that main level. That doesn't mean the box office is gonna be on the corner, it could be anywhere in here, and the lobby could wrap around on the corner as well, so that would be nice. And concessions can be out in the lobby and things like that, so. It looks like we're, accommodating most all program elements on the main level that really wanna be and need to be on the main level. What you see here are those rows of the telescopic seating in plan. There are opportunities to get some that have a little bit of curve to them and still retract. We'll be looking at that. So don't take this diagram, again, as a design of the seating. But they would be retracted and then stored here in the back. So what that then begins to say is that to enter, we need to go around that wall. So you're not entering kind of on a center aisle. You don't have that experience. But, and we'll talk through all of those with you, all those issues with you as we're going through the design iterations. Any questions on the main level?
John, just one, if the orchestra storage shell space goes away, I think it would be great to have a tour manager office, production office on stage level, even if it's 100 square feet.
Right, we could bring that office up. From the
Yeah,
basement,
because
sure.
that's really where they want to be at the
Sure.
center of the action.
Yeah.
You know, whether they're, especially if they're artists, if their star dressing rooms are on the same level, to have them at that same level, even in a small space. It doesn't have to be toilets or showers, but just a desk and a chair, someplace that they can work for the day.
Well, and even if we decide one of the star dressing rooms can go up,
Yeah,
then we
right.
start to have opportunities for other things that we identify as being critical, being at stage
Mhm.
level.
One other thing too,
Yes.
in the lobby, it doesn't have to be permanent space. Again, we can build this with 3 6-foot tables and linens on them.
Yeah.
But just some consideration as to where merchandise might live in the lobby.
Merchandising, yes, right.
Okay,
We'll show
Okay.
carry that with them.
that's
Yeah.
right.
So, but you can see that we're filling up that main level pretty fast with the program elements that really need that. So for us to find opportunities for the tapas bar is gonna be challenging.
So the other thing that is not on the first floor that I would think would need to be there if we decide we're gonna go forward with it is the gallery space. We had talked about having gallery space on the front, but unless we're gonna do that as part of the lobby.
Right, well, but if I recall, at the last meeting, there was a mention of someone actually wanting a windowless gallery space,
Yes.
which might be in the basement,
Right.
where we have plenty of space.
Right.
But there could be
Yep,
displays of art throughout
Throughout the
the
whole
lobby
place.
space. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dedicated gallery.
got it.
So think about it kind of, we always like to try to think about spaces doing dual duty and finding efficiency that way so that everything doesn't have to be a separate space.
Well, even on the lower level where you had that one big room that could be used for events,
Mhm.
they were even talking about, at one time, the gallery could be a multipurpose room, like a S3 space, and could be a gallery, could be another event area.
Mhm.
They just wanted no windows and able to be secured.
Right, so we could, if they really
Right.
wanted a securable space, then it could be carved out of that down below. Okay, so we'll-
I just want to, just for my own peace of mind, as we're saying, this is not a design, but if someone who's looking at theater is looking at this diagram, the proportions of this are off.
Yeah.
Mm.
They are.
And so someone sitting here wouldn't be able to see.
Right.
And that's not the intent. I just don't want people to freak out.
Yeah. No, we'll get that, no question. We'll
Can I,
get
can I
that.
just ask
Trish?
one other quick question?
You
The
just gotta say.
catering support, is it a must that it's on that floor, or could that be down in the basement area?
I missed
Where
that,
there-
Trish.
where
What's-
there's
What
elevators.
support was that?
The
The
catering
catering
The
support.
yeah, I actually wrote myself a question, does catering need to be at the main level? And I
Right.
think that's almost a question for caterers. I don't know, Peter, if you have any experience with that at
Yeah,
all?
having, if that support space is supporting, envisioning the open floor cocktail reception, to service that effectively, it really should be on that same level.
Okay.
To run stuff upstairs
Yeah.
or through elevators and to do it, get hot food out to people.
Right.
Would be a challenge.
Especially with no cooking, real catering facilities
Yeah.
there,
Right.
every second counts, so,
Okay.
Yes.
I think that would be one that,
you'd want to keep on the first floor.
We'll just bump out on that Pearl Street sidewalk a little bit.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Not a
You don't need
problem.
a sidewalk there, right?
Right.
The sidewalk's only this big, right?
Hey, we've bumped out the streets before, we could just bump out the
No
sidewalk
problem.
there.
Okay.
Oh, Tim, we
Not
can
in
do
this
it.
scope, I know.
All right,
Making
so
your life interesting.
moving up one level to the second level. Again, the stage and crossover are consistent. This is the parterre that Joe was talking about, where we have about 48 seats at this level. This little dash box is for the mixing position if it's located, at the top of the telescopic seating there. At this level, we're saying, dimmer rack, AV rack room, behind the proscenium line. Loading is going to be 2-story space, so that's open to below. Tech supervisor office, we just laid in on this floor because we had some space. This is where we start to pick up the communal dressing room, so that's just one floor off of stage. Now there's also the option of putting them below stage if they're, if we have all of that storage space, then communal dressing can go down below stage.
And that's where the green room is.
And that's where the green room is. And then that starts to free up some space, on that backside of the apartment building that has those wonderful windows. And, I think any spaces along the perimeter of that apartment building shell are going to be,
Good office.
pretty premier spaces because those are nice windows
Yeah.
that get a lot of daylight. So you can see we have a little bit of extra space back there for backstage spaces. Again, as we come up, we're cognizant of mechanical, electrical space needs. Now, we're showing again kind of the same large men's and women's rooms up here. So we're probably, in the end, a little over on the square footages we're showing for toilet rooms, but that'll be adjusted as we get into the detailed layouts. The purple we've shown just kind of notched out in case we want to think about a double height lobby space right there at the very front. So this is more of a parterre level promenade around, but wide enough to where you might have maybe seating around at the edge, at the balcony edge, and then plenty of space for people to circulate. And think about some space that you might have concessions up at that level as well. So we've blocked out 250 square feet there. Control booth is up there, and then these spaces here where those light and sound locks that Joe mentioned earlier, we start to find those there. So, a little bit of leftover space there in the shoe store building for program elements that we think are appropriate at that level. Any questions on the second level? Mark?
This question's for Pete. Is the quality of space for a star more important than stage access?
Depends on the star.
Yeah.
If it's the star where you're picking out specific M&M colors.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just curious because we walked through the building today, and the second floor is going to have, at this level, some, as John had said, some really nice spaces, a lot of window space, and so my question is it better to have high-quality space and move the star space up and then free up space at stage level? I'm just asking.
I
from
think
your
a
experience.
lot of times, having at least one of the star spaces at stage level and a tour manager small office is probably the best setup. So maybe it means one goes up and one goes down, where they could come in and have a choice.
Yeah.
Some artists are more agile than others, and they might say, oh, I just want to be right here and be right off the stage deck, and others might say, yeah, this is great, I'm going to go upstairs, I have a nice natural light. And so I would think if to answer your question, I think having at least one of those on stage, but not necessarily needing to have both, because that is a nice consideration to have some space with natural light and whatever else might be
In our
around
experience
there.
bears that out.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes they insist on having to be adjacent to stage.
Yeah. Those that really want to be on stage really want to be on right there on stage. So having at least one would be great.
Okay. So we'll go to the next level, the third level. So let's talk about the audience chamber at this level first. So this is the balcony level that you saw in Joe's section, 2,100 square feet. Now it starts to overlap where we're showing the stairs and elevators that we stacked on every level. So this is where we know we're gonna have to start to move things around, and because we need that elevator stair access, both stairs, to access the balcony level. So this is the open audience chamber below. And at this level, this is where we're keeping our building edge back 15 feet from the surf, which is down here. So this is just rooftop. Then there was a question raised at last meeting was, well, do we want to consider a roof terrace? You know, depending on where this wall finally ends up, you know, this is about a 15-foot, 12 to 15-foot deep area on the roof.
Nice.
You know, that's a budget item, but it's also an amenity. Then you need to be able to circulate here, and then you know, it's okay to have restrooms one floor below. They don't all have, we don't have to have those on every single floor, but you probably would want some kind of storage space or something off of that, just so you don't have to carry things up and down. So that's kind of how things are laying out. Balcony is really the main thing. Yes?
Tim?
Just to clarify, when you say roof terrace, I just want to make sure we're all understanding what that actually is.
Yeah.
So are you saying going outside into the elements?
That's what we talked about last time.
Okay. So once you cross from that pink area,
Yeah.
like there would be a
Yeah.
doorway in theory, then you would be 12, 15 feet, whatever it is, to the roof's edge?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're.
Yeah, now, there
You're
would need to
thinking
be a
jumpers,
little,
aren't you?
I'm thinking I have a risk management department.
It's not gonna be happy.
well, I mean, so all of that has to be weighed. All of that has to be weighed.
Yeah.
And, you know, there would need to be some vestibule space and things like that, you know, so it's
But it could be done. I mean,
it's raising the question at this point in time, you know, is that a programmatic element that we need to be planning for?
Yeah.
I think that's a programmatic event, thing that we would like. I would love to see us have some outside access for nice summer nights,
Yeah.
et cetera, if it's possible to do that.
If
Well,
it's-
It's a
even
real
if-
signature too, to have that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
I mean, that really could be.
Even if you didn't have it at the very beginning, to have the doors to get out
Yep.
there, and then the design could happen afterward would be.
So how many people in theory could you have on that? I'm just saying approximately, because I mean.
That's where your fire marshal comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where our fire.
There's egress.
Yeah, we've got two means of egress, but you don't want to pack them in like sardines, which is what the code calls for, right? So if you allow 10 square feet per person, which is generous, you're looking at 120 people.
Oh, that's
It's,
good.
I would say maybe 100, because, you know, we got to carve out of here some vestibule space and things like that. So I think 100 is going to be very generous.
So you could theory put a bar out there, and you could.
You could have, maybe have a mobile bar again,
Yeah,
if
right,
you
right.
roll it into a little storage room or something
Right.
like that. So things like that are what we would
Yeah,
Like
that'd be
where
good.
you
work
get
in and try to.
refreshments.
And that would,
Schematic design.
that would also impact what the front of the building looks like, because you would have to have some kind of railings and.
Yeah, you
Right.
would.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
there's
it
no
really
question.
impact what the front would look like.
Yeah, and it's something, this is one of those things that we can leave open
Yeah.
For
for
a
quite a
bit.
long time.
Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
There are costs that we would want to share with you probably after schematics, as part of the schematic pricing.
Yep.
That would pick up the rail and the decking and the additional waterproofing and
Right.
things like
Yep.
that stuff.
Yeah, right.
But yes, I'd say conceptually, that would be a bonus to have as part of the
Okay,
plan.
well, and that's the way we need to understand it at this point, conceptually, programmatically.
Conceptually bonus,
Conceptually
not
bonus.
required, but
Right.
that would be a wicked
Excellent.
cool thing to add.
Well,
But I have a question.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
yep.
First of all, my first concern was what Tim raised, like, people are gonna wanna go out there and have a drink, be it coffee, iced tea, or a glass of wine. So we figured out we can get a bar out there or whatever. But my other question is, do we need to figure this out as part of figuring out what the marquee is?
You may well.
that's what I'm saying.
And we'll
That-
see
that's-
that as
It
a
needs to
component.
affect
Yeah,
it.
I'm
Yeah.
just thinking
It would
that,
all work,
Okay.
it would
It has
have to
to
work
work.
together, right,
Right.
because, flash, if, the marquee is here or on the corner, that's gonna be, right there. If we have a vertical
right, I
element
was gonna
as
say if
part of the
there's a
marquee,
blade,
then,
yeah,
that's
That's right.
where you want your picture taken, next to the
Right.
marquee on the roof.
right.
So,
Yeah. Marketing.
Yeah, that's a great marketing.
It really is a great marketing.
House of Blues in Boston, the foundation room is like that. When you go
Yeah.
outside, you're right next to the sign.
Yeah.
And it's like the VIP spot.
Right,
Great photo op
so,
Oh, there's your VIP spot.
for the kids.
Yeah.
yeah,
Anyway.
okay, excellent.
Just a minor thing,
Yes, Joe.
the crossover corridor wouldn't be up that high. It's just, it's gonna
It's
be.
only
but-
needed at
But
the
there'll
top.
be ductwork there.
Right, I
Absolutely.
mean, there's gonna be something behind stage, so
Yeah.
we were kinda holding that.
Yeah,
in
oh yeah,
reserve,
no,
so we're
no,
not
it'll be
programming.
ductwork.
Yeah,
Because one thing, when we get into dealing with the mechanical engineer, it's very important to keep the stage clear of ductwork and sprinklers. And
yeah, they always wanna put it over the stage, and we have to
Make it go somewhere
make
else.
it, yeah.
No sprinkling on the actors.
All right, so on this level, then we're showing the communal dressing number 2, and again, that could be down under stage and then free up, this whole level in the apartment building. So you can see, as we start going up, we start seeing
Getting space.
more and more available space in the back of house, right? And that multi-purpose space that was in the program, I mean, it could be down here, it could be below the stage again. We can't put everything below the stage, but it's malleable in where it goes. So this is the 4th and highest level, and because we've got 4 levels in the apartment building. So this is where we were showing the venue admin suite up here, 575 square feet, showing 2 more back-of-house restrooms up here. And this is where we initially had put the multi-purpose space, not knowing if that was really kind of the conference space, if you would use it, for that. If it's down lower, it could still be a conference space, but be more accessible to the shows coming in, folks like that. So
Even though it's back of house, is that a potential location for a donor lounge or?
Mm.
The windows are good.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah,
the windows out
it
there are
is,
nice.
right, yeah, and, we
We have a
had,
beautiful
all of
view
this
to
was
the
available on the floor below, so maybe
Right.
you get, maybe this corner on 2 levels
Yeah.
is rentable, multi-purpose space.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a big deal to put, a pair of unisex restrooms on each level, because we're just stacking the plumbing, so. And again, each level is accessible by elevator and 2 means of egress. And we start to see we're now at the roof level of over the audience chamber at this point.
Wow.
So that was
Are
a
there
lot of information
Yeah.
to throw at you.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But I think
Nice to
the
see.
takeaway here for us was that the program, the
Fits.
essential program for the Performing Arts Center fits well within the shell we have for the apartment building and the shoe store, with a little bit of extra elbow room. So we were quite pleased with how it fit.
Any questions by anybody overall on the blocking? Obviously, if you think of something that we've missed or that we talked about and I can't think of anything that didn't show up. We'll get feedback back to you, but
I
Trish?
just have one kind of quick question. We've been talking about this, taking the building existing and so on, which is really what I hope to do.
Okay.
But there was always the other conversation of starting from scratch and so on. Obviously, we wouldn't have this type of thing. This is keeping the building as it is and using all the space.
Well,
Yes,
this
no?
is working within the footprint,
Okay, the footprint.
not necessarily saying this is working within the shells of those existing walls. Right.
Yeah, I don't think we will have a definitive decision.
Right.
Okay,
Until we're at the end of the schematic phase.
Okay.
So as long as we're working within the footprint.
okay.
Either way works.
It'll be the
because
same design regardless of, how you have to do it.
Right, now, you know, it's whether we're designing a new enclosure or we're
Right.
modifying an existing enclosure. And I only say that because our engineers, except for these guys, generally follow behind us.
Okay.
And they will be analyzing the
All those columns
implications
and
of
everything.
everything that we're talking about.
Okay.
And then the cost estimator comes in and says, well, you know, and Harvey, the CM, will say it would be easier to do this, or who's the bad guy?
I was gonna say that, Jim.
Oh, Carl.
There's no value judgment.
They just know.
Then he comes in and spoils the whole thing, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I mean, the guy's got me back. No, it's,
Yeah. Everybody
it
gets
gets
their.
into constructability issues and the cost of doing things.
Okay.
One question I do want to raise, and I don't know if you have the answer, or Pete, if you know, is, you know, when the seats are retracted, and we're talking maybe 4,000 square feet of usable space for banqueting, and you can use, you know, it kind of the proscenium width all the way back, perhaps, for banqueting. Is there a target number that you see as essential
For seating?
for seating in a banquet situation?
I can tell you what I'd love. I don't
Say,
know
what
if it'll
was it,
fit,
what
but
you
yeah, we'd like 350 to 400. I'm not a catering person. I have no idea what their requirements are for that size. I'm trying to think. I don't even know if I know off the top of my head how big the other places in Nashua are to compare it. That'd be easy enough for us to figure out.
All right, well, I did a quick takeoff on our way here, actually, and we would be around 225 maybe in this area, and then maybe another 50 people. So at most, we would be 300.
Okay.
At most. And that was thinking about 60-inch rounds, which have 8 people
Yep.
seated around them, so, you know,
So
but
we
if
make
you.
10 people sit at
You-
those.
yeah,
seats.
so
And
you
that,
get
but
10
that would
people
be
at
taking
those,
stage
right.
and the main floor,
Yep.
so if you want to reserve the stage for whatever.
VIPs or
VIPs
something else, yep.
like that, or, you know, the days for the lecture or
Yeah.
something like that, then you're down to maybe 2 to 225.
Okay.
Would the parterre be able to be?
Well,
Yeah, I
If we
don't,
made it, not,
You could fit 10
Not
on the
ideally.
table if you
One
have
would
one.
Yeah.
count on it.
Yeah.
we make all of our guests be very friendly and sit 10 to a table, so.
Or on top of each other.
Or on laps, no. So ideally, and I'm,
person table.
and I'm, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So,
10,
so,
20
and I'm
person,
speaking purely from the Chamber of Commerce's perspective, for our major event that we do, my wish and hope is that we'll be able to do it at the Performing Arts Center.
Yeah.
It's been a goal for a while. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We're one organization. But I would certainly think the other, the up to 200 or whatever, if we're talking about hosting a wedding there or other smaller events that happen throughout the course of the city, would easily be accommodated in that size.
Okay, we
Yeah.
hadn't talked about
So
that.
we're the outlier,
Okay.
so you don't need to design around us. We'll just cross our fingers and hope.
I think the symphony gets about 250.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking they got a bit over 200.
I'm trying to think, the
yeah.
only place that really can accommodate more than 300 or 250 really even seated at rounds is the Radisson.
Correct.
And I think they max out at 400?
Four and change.
400, yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't get events, that many events.
No,
They
there aren't
don't get
that
that
many.
many people.
Right.
Market here will tell you somewhere between 2 and 250.
Yep.
I mean,
Oh,
that's,
okay.
is
Well,
really.
So that, which works perfectly.
Works great,
Excellent.
Yeah.
And as we do our floor plans and move through schematics, we'll be showing the different table layouts and seating layouts and things like that.
Perfect tool.
Awesome.
Great.
Anything
Thank you.
else on this?
Ted, do you want to, next steps
Yep.
kind of thing, or?
Yeah, so of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with the next iteration of what we heard this evening. Your homework is the subcommittee, as we talked about, and Tim will have a copy of this presentation, which includes the quantitative space program. That's really what we're looking for, a kind of sense of commitment
Feedback
to.
on, yep.
And if we could have that ideally a week from Thursday, so after the next, give you another cycle of meetings, that would give us time to adjust what we're working on for 2 weeks.
And just a quick question, and then Tim and Brendan. Any other subcommittees that you can think of when you think about those 5 areas that we should at least be given some consideration to, we may need at some point? Or is it really just around the AV and tech? Where you think it's not necessarily a full steering committee decision, but we could use a couple of people to dive a little more deeply?
I think it is pretty focused
On
on
that?
the AV, tech,
Okay.
and lighting.
Yeah, the rest of it, I think, is information that we'll have
Okay,
with the story.
I just wanted to make sure we were thinking about that. Tim?
It's when we start bringing in the test, the seats.
Yep.
So that you can test them.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure the group knows, we will be meeting next Wednesday. I fully expect that it will be a continued conversation of this to make sure we're all on track. But in addition to that, I really want to give some time to Pete and talk about actually operations and make sure we're all on the same page and we know what where we're going with everything, so we can continue moving that process forward as well. So, so we will be meeting next week at 5 p.m. to have that conversation, and then we'll be scheduled to meet with the architects again, I believe, the following Wednesday. So.
Excellent. Brendan?
Yeah, I'm good.
You
Thank
good?
you.
Anyone else have anything, you guys have anything else, or are you all set?
Are we clear on the comment about shell versus no shell, that decision? We know the decision has to be made, but when do you need it?
I think we
I think we were allowing
couple weeks.
kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
And if I have my goal, you'll have a real good answer next Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I will give you time to
Yeah.
weigh in the absent parties and.
Digest it.
Okay.
People are not gonna wanna miss this meeting,
Yeah,
otherwise
'cause,
they get volunteered for things.
I know, really. Because Mark and Lindsay were
I was
both
gonna say,
volunteered, voluntold.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
else from members of the steering committee? Any other questions or comments before we move to adjourn? Judy, did you have something, or are you
No, I
good?
was just gonna say that the symphony does have
Next
shells
Wednesday.
over at the keep that they move in and out. I
Yeah,
don't know if they would fit or they'd be adequate or anything else, but Mark would know all that.
Okay.
And he can give you input on what exists over at the keep.
Great.
yeah, that's what I was thinking, of
Right.
they have the
Right.
portable ones, yeah.
If they want to truck them over.
Yeah, that's a challenge, but
Don't know where they keep them, maybe they truck them over to the keep.
anything else? Seeing nothing, I will adjourn. Do we need a motion for that?
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn, so Mary Lou, second?
Second.
Judy, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
No.
Hearing none, we are adjourned at 6:49 PM.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was a great presentation.